Hello and welcome to Sensei podcast. This is Manos Brilakis discussing with leaders in the field of CTO and complex PCI. Sensei means teacher or master in Japanese. The goal of the Sensei podcast is to help you learn and improve in CTO and complex PCI so that you can become the best that you can be and offer your patients the best possible results. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sensei Podcast. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Elliot Smith, who is a consultant cardiologist and director of the CTO program at Barts Health NHS Trust and Guy's and St. Thomas Hospital. Hope I didn't kill it too much, Elliot. So thanks again for being here tonight. Super excited to discuss with you.
Yeah, thanks very much for inviting me. I think the people at Guy's and St. Thomas's might be upset. I trained there back in the 90s. And I've got links there, but I don't work there. I also work at the Royal Free Hospital. But don't worry, there's lots of hospitals in London. I'm a cardiologist from London. That'll do.
Perfect. Center of the world. So Elliot, I know you've always been very astute in how you describe things, how you teach people, how you do your case in a very systematic and methodical way. Has that always been like this as a child? When did you do all this? Or it comes naturally, or you worked on it? How did that happen?
No, I don't think anything comes naturally. I'm a big fan of the 10,000 hours, purposeful practice, that sort of thing. I think I've probably always had a little bit of an analytical side. My dad was an engineer and he was a problem solver. And from his point of view, everything in our lives growing up was all about solving problems and getting things done. And he was a sort of person that people in the community and round and about, we lived in Manchester, we grew up not too far away from my beloved Old Trafford, where Manchester United play football. And everything was very much about people coming to him. He was one of these people that if you had a problem, he always had advice, and he was very analytical in the way that he did things. And when we were taking exams when I was a kid, he'd always say three things, and it was ingrained in us, and I've ingrained it in my children. Read the question, extract the information, concentrate. And he'd say that over and over again to us, and it was so deeply ingrained that I think probably I took some of that into my future in cardiology.
See, I knew it that there was some secret starting early on. But how did you end to become a cardiologist? Your father was an engineer, right? So why not an engineer?
Yeah, he hated engineering because he found it very difficult. Ended up going into business. He didn't want his kids to be business people because if we ever needed to travel or change country or whatever, he wanted us all to have a skill. I think medicine became the family business for us. I was the youngest of three kids, and the older two went into medicine. I had no originality whatsoever. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was okay at sciences. What I wanted to do comedy. Yeah. So I thought I'd go along to university and then I'd be discovered as a comic. But I found out, and this is a worry probably for the listeners, but I turned out to be a better doctor than I was a comic. But I also found a captive audience. So I had patients and latterly other doctors who, as you got more senior, people had to listen to you. And so I sort of tried to combine the two in medicine. So I ended up going into medicine slightly reluctantly, and I found that I liked it. And the thing that I liked most actually was being in the OR. And I was going to do orthopedic surgery, and I was going to do orthopedics and trauma all the way through. I came to Cook County and did a trauma sort of attachment with some amazing surgeons, and the surgeons in the States were running ITU, and it was really an amazing time. But when I came back, trauma surgery was little old ladies falling over with broken hips, and our orthopedic surgeons in the 90s weren't the best clinicians, and they weren't running the ITU, and it was a bit dull. And, my aspiration met an opportunity and I met some people doing cardiology, and I saw interventional cardiology, and this felt like a great fit. You know, you were both a physician and a surgeon. You could look at everything. You could manage every part of the patient pathway and control it, because I was quite controlling. This was going to be very good. And it just opened up a new direction. That was why interventional cardiology came along.
And then this is one thing to do interventional, but then you went it one step further, and now you're tackling the CTOs and all the complex stuff. How did that happen? Was that preconceived? It happened along the way?
No, I would love to say, and I think I even have said over the years, so if you've ever seen me speak, you know, that I looked and I saw that CTO was a massive unmet need. We'd seen the data, and I wanted to be at the forefront of trying to meet that important unmet need. And I'd love that to be the case. But the reality was that the landscape at the time that I became a consultant and you became an attending was that CTO was a desert. There wasn't much there. And we were just at the beginning. You know, I became an attending in 2008, late 2007. You know, retrograde was in its infancy, but was just starting up. And ADR was just emerging and trying to find its place. And I, like many people around that time, was just coming out as a newly qualified interventional cardiologist, feeling like I knew a lot. And I thought I was a good operator. And my aspiration met an opportunity. And the aspiration was I wanted to be as good as I could be. And I wanted to find a niche that was really important, was going to help people. But I had no clue what it was. I didn't know what it was. And then I met, fortuitously, Craig Thompson. And Craig, for those, many people listening will know, was a real founding father of CTO and certainly ADR, and was there at the beginning of ADR. And he was trying to get some research done with some first-in-man projects through Yale, which is where he was. And Yale had a link to what was then our sister institution, now we're all merged, called University College. But they didn't have the CTO patients. The old London Chest Hospital that I worked at had this massive burden of patients. And so I was asked to look after him for the day in the cath lab. And one of the fellows set up some CTO cases. And at the end of that day, I think we'd done 3 retrograde cases together. And the final one, he put me up front. And it was like, what do you mean? I'll be first? No, he goes, this is training. And it started an amazing relationship where he would come over regularly, all that way from the States. And I realized this was a completely fundamental step change. And it was something that we had to do. And thankfully, my institution was supportive of me taking it forward, mainly because no one else really wanted to.
Well, but still, even though you have one of the best teachers, Craig Thompson, obviously that's huge. Still, it takes a lot of work when he's not there and when you're doing the cases and learning the techniques, which, as you said, are maturing at this time and no one is exactly sure how to do it. So how did that happen? Did you get some, because there were no books at the time, you talked to people, you talked to Craig, did you figure out yourself? How did you end up learning the ins and outs?
Well, Craig learned something earlier than a lot of the rest of us did, which was that you couldn't get these skills and you couldn't learn and develop whatever it was going to become inside your institution. The skills didn't exist there. So we needed to find each other and branch out. And the first thing that he did was, apart from coming over and helping me with cases, was he invited me with him to go to Bellingham for that seminal 2011 meeting. I was one of 17 or 16 of us there, 17 cases done. You were there, Manos. It was the first time I ever met you. So many founding, names in CTO were there. And of course I met Bill. And it was game changing, but it was game changing for all of us. I didn't even realize what was happening there. I just thought it was loads and loads of cases. But together, Aaron and Mike Wyman, so Aaron Grantham, Mike Wyman, Tony DeMartini, an amazing mentor and friend, and Bill and Craig, along with all of us, but mainly you guys, because I was earlier on my journey, were actually deeply analyzing. And that's something I really enjoyed. We were going deep into the cases during the cases, and then we really analyzed the intra-procedural decision-making, which is how the hybrid algorithm came up. Why did we switch? When did we switch? Why was it needed? And this sort of systematic thinking was starting to come into what we were doing. And they created this rule book. And of course, you were on that seminal paper of the hybrid algorithm. So that happened, but that's just one meeting. And you can't do it with one meeting. So I had to find some other people. And there were some UK people who were going on the same journey, and we didn't know it. And one was just down the road and was an old mate of mine, and that was John O'Hill. And then he introduced me to James Spratt and to Simon Walsh and to Colin Hanratty. And then Julian Strange. Me and Jules are twins. You might not know this. I'm obviously the better looking one. But we were born on exactly the same day. I won't tell you the year. So we're the same age. So if you think I look older, it's just I've had more stress. And all of them were going through the same process. So we started to come together, and we were invested in by industry to deliver education. And I learned more from spending 1 or 2 years doing courses and cases together with those guys. That was the key, that during our inverted commas proctoring process, we were actually learning far more. And we were already iterating the algorithm and learning as we went. And then we really accelerated this journey where we said, well, look, maybe I remember actually in 2011 thinking, sure, I'm pretty good at this. I should go proctoring. And then I met Walsh and I saw what Walsh was doing. And I said, yeah, no, I'm not, I don't think I'm ready for it. And Walsh, he said 2 years later, why don't you come proctoring? And I said, no, I'm not. You guys are streets ahead of where I am. And he said, come to Belfast. So I went to Belfast. He put me up in his legendary place in Jumeirah, and I met his gorgeous family who were amazing. So again, this is all about people really rather than anything else. And we did some of the most amazing cases that I'd done to that date. And at the end of that day, he said, right, you're ready. You can train other people. And while I wasn't convinced, I went on that journey, and the rest is history.
So clearly, the people made a huge impact and the interaction going forward. What was the most difficult thing for you to learn during those years? Was it the wire? Was the algorithm? What was the thing that you found the hardest to master?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The funny thing is, I think the hardest skill set, and I still think it is actually the ADR skill set and doing it well and properly. In terms of CTO, I mean, we could be more philosophical about what was the hardest thing to learn. We could think about how you deal with failure and taking your own group back home on a journey to trust in you and setting up processes. I mean, that's a whole different discussion. In terms of the actual skill sets themselves, I think ADR, we thought at the outset, was going to be so good that it might obviate the need to ever go retrograde, and that we would reach a much bigger mass, and that your jobbing interventionist, once you made it good enough, would be able to do it. And we realized, it took us a while, but we realized after a couple of years that actually, you really needed quite a lot of additional skill sets to be able to bring it together. And for me, and I've seen your papers and on, the stepwise approach to training, for me, it was always easier to train someone else in ADR if you already had a retrograde skill set. So retrograde is a higher risk procedure, but it's actually, in some ways, in my mind, easier to deliver, because once you get to that retrograde point, provided that you're managing the risk and you've got someone with you, you're going to be successful 90% of the time. Whereas ADR, even in the best hands, and you commit to all the rules and you do the very best that you can, ADR as the primary success is maybe what we'd say, maybe 80% successful. And you're going to have to go retrograde or do something else or invest when it's not successful. So I think ADR took me a while, and you go in steps. You think you've got it, and then you just sort of suddenly realize, okay, am I going to be able to apply it to a diffuse distal landing zone? Am I okay to apply it just proximal to a difficult bifurcation? How much space do I really need? How am I going to prep? How am I going to manage hematoma? So in terms of telling someone push, pull, turn, it's more straightforward. But in terms of delivering it, I think it's less forgiving. It's less forgiving.
And then when it comes to, building those skills, developing the retrograde, the ADR skill set, were you feeling nervous, anxious, or even now, all these cases you've done, do you get nervous before the cases? Do you get anxious, or how do you feel before you do a case?
Yeah, I'd like to say, I think if you care about your patient, you should always be a little bit nervous. But Bill always said, and I think many of us have used this and repeated it over and over, to do CTO cases, you have to learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable, and that takes training. So the adrenaline goes, but you become much more focused. Instead of speeding up, you slow down, you breathe. You have to train for it. It's purposeful practice. It's the same route to expertise of anything. And what that means is, look, the reality is that CTOs are more complex. And, I've often said that it's not going to be one game-changing technology that gets you over the line. It's about merging skill sets. And if you think about it, if you're taking 100 complex CTOs, and not that many of us do 100 complex CTOs a year, you do, I do most years. But in 100 cases, if you've got an ADR rate of about 20%, that's not a lot of ADR that you're doing per year to get you skilled. If you're doing 50% retrograde or 40 or 30% retrograde, you got 30 cases, and the complication rates are low. So even if the complication rate was at the worst, 7% for a complex retrograde, you're not going to see these complications so often. So you have to learn the skill by volume, expertise. You've got to learn from other people's mistakes because you can't make them all yourself. And I think you have to do some of it away from the patient. I think there's got to be a space for learning certain skill sets away from the patient. Say, for example, coiling, learning how to use certain bits of kit that you use rarely. When you're adrenalized, it's difficult to integrate those things into your armamentarium. So you have to have some experience, and it takes time to get experience. It takes commitment to get experience. And the best thing to do to manage that risk is to be able to predict it and to get someone else in or do shared cases or shared learning to share that cognitive load. And James Spratt and I and many others talk about this cognitive load that, often the complication doesn't necessarily happen because it was inevitable. It's usually that we miss conspicuously obvious information. The wire went too far, the guide went too deep, the balloon came out at the end of the guide cath. It's little moments that if you are sharing that load, someone else is your eyes and ears, and you're pushing on the wrong guide, you're injecting, hang on, put that down. It's when you've got so many different things to concentrate on. If you can go on this journey with another partner in your institution, that would be the biggest piece of advice that I could tell you.
Perfect. And then I could not agree more that having another person next to you makes a huge difference, an experienced person, especially who can support you. But then in terms of the preparation and doing all this planning and the cognitive aspects of it, is that changing for you still, or you now have your technique, your strategy, your approach that you prepare for every case?
Yeah, look, those same rules apply. I think the other thing that I've not mentioned is we've gone on this journey as clinicians, but you need a proper team around you. You need a group of people who understand what it is that you're doing. And when something goes wrong, you don't just want your second operator to understand it. You want the physiologist, the radiographer, if you've got one, the allied health professionals to be in it with you, and they need to own the surface as well. And before every case, we have a team brief. We talk about what kit we're going to use. We're going to talk about what our basic expectation of the case will be. And then I tend to narrate. It's almost like, all that live case experience that we have. I mean, the problem is shutting me up, isn't it? It's like,
No.
what we do is you keep bookmarking the case. What was always difficult was when some people visit from overseas, and if their first language isn't English, particularly, it can be really difficult for them to communicate. But if they go into their shell and they don't tell you what you're doing, you don't learn anything. So I signpost my cases all the way through. Right, we've dealt with the proximal cap. I'm happy with that now. Knuckles looking good, but I don't want to re-enter here because we're right on a bifurcation. So now I'm ready to go retrograde. I've got my guide extension in. Let's switch retrograde. Give me this, and this. And then they shouldn't be leaving the room because we've got a CTO trolley with everything there. And there should be nothing really that we have to get from elsewhere. And you almost hermetically seal myself in the lab on a CTO day. And I have a day for CTO or 2 days for CTO where, I'm very fortunate. I've not got STEMIs coming in. The STEMIs will go into another cath lab. I don't need to worry about that. So I'm sealed off. Everyone's phone is off. I don't want anyone's phone ringing, including mine. If it has to wait until later. And I think that's our duty to the patient. And I'm not sure that we do it well enough because I travel to a lot of different places, and it's amazing, how many people you'll say, this is what we need, this is what we're going to do. And then you ask for the piece of equipment, someone's gone next door, but we knew we were going to use it. And I always say, if your surgical colleague is doing a bypass operation in the other room, they don't open one wrong retractor at a time. They've got all the kit that they're going to use and they have it ready.
Well, I think focus is important, as you say, but it's our maybe era, the way we function, all the distractions around you. So many people do get unfocused. How can you keep that laser beam on what's going on and be able to keep things tight and less distractions?
Well, I think it's all the things I've already said. There's no magic wand for it. I mean, how do I personally stay focused? I think what's very, very difficult to teach, and what I still come away from every case doing, is analysing the case and going, could have done that better, could have got there quicker. And it's always the procedural decision making. I mean, sometimes you really think that this is a retrograde case. It's only going to be done retrograde. There's no antegrade options for it. And you can't get retrograde, and you spend an hour and a half trying to go retrograde. And then it's a low likelihood antegrade wire. But lo and behold, your wire's quite close to the distal cap, and you bring down a device and suddenly you realize, oh my goodness, I've completely misjudged this. And actually I could have gone antegrade. Why didn't I do it sooner? And, every time you look at that, you have to forgive yourself a little bit, because what we're doing is probabilistic. But also, we constantly have to learn to fail faster and switch quicker. But when you say that, that's very easy to say, but how do you know when you've given a certain strategy enough time? And I think the answer to that is, if you really are genuinely doing the same thing over and over again, you've got to stop. But it might be that you're in an antegrade wires approach, but the reason that you're failing is the guide support isn't right, and the guide extension needs to be deeper, and I can't approach at the right angle because I've not got a dual lumen microcatheter. So then it is worth investing some time, because once you get all those three things sorted out, then when you bring your stiff wire, now I can safely puncture and direct, etc. Whereas beforehand, with the wrong guide, without support. So as long as you're changing what you're doing and responding constantly and saying, I'm failing at the moment, what is my barrier, what I'm going to change, as long as you're constantly moving forward, any time where you're just doing the same thing over and over again and just thinking, I can't, why is it not working? It should work. You've got to be able to tell yourself it's not working and move on, even if that includes stopping.
Yeah, and that's, as you said, some of the hardest things to know, because you always think, a little bit more, and then 2 hours go by. But as you said before, bad things can happen, and you want to fail sooner, but sometimes you fail with a complication, which obviously takes a bigger toll. So how do you approach that? What happens when you get a complication? Does it affect you a lot personally? How do you recover? How do you go through this? Do you have any suggestions?
Well, if you care about your patients, when you have a complication, it will be hard. And I remember looking, I can't remember where I was, but someone was talking about a surgeon in the 50s who said that every surgeon, and let's be clear, what we're doing is complex endovascular surgery. Okay. So, this delineation between surgeons, physicians, it's all fictitious. We're operating on arteries and we're doing it from 1.5 meters away in grayscale in 2 dimensions. So, what we're doing is difficult. And he said that, every surgeon carries with them a small graveyard, that they'll always be able to think of. You can remember your 5 worst complications. Everyone can remember someone that they've lost. And you do reflect on it and you say, why didn't I do this? Couldn't I have done something different? And usually the answer will be, yeah, most of the time it was avoidable. And actually the risk is if you tell yourself, well, this was always going to happen. There's a 1% event rate and this is my 1%. You won't learn anything from it. So the first thing to say is it will hurt. And dealing with failure is very, very difficult. And we will fail more than anyone else because the very best CTO operators are 90, 95%. That's a lot of failure if you're doing a decent amount of volume. So you've firstly got to forgive yourself and you've got to accept the limitations of what we're doing. It's an imperfect science. So that's the first thing. And then you've got to be open to share. And that is the hardest thing in the world because when you've done something really bad and particularly, if it's a death, it's very difficult to share those, but those are the most important cases to share. And it is not a coincidence that at any complication session, what we tend to see is the great saves. And we get told that the way to get out of this situation is by doing whatever we saw that operator do to save it. And that may be true, but you don't know that if you did that 10 times, that the other 9, they would die because we're not showing those cases. So we really have to hold ourselves to account. Reminds me of an old story of there was a great American mathematician who came over to England during the Second World War to help us with the RAF because Spitfires were coming back and they were shot up. And how were we going to reinforce the Spitfires? And at that point, what they'd noticed was that when the Spitfires came back, the areas that were shot through most would be the wings, a little bit on the body, etc. But there were never really any holes in the hull or in the tail. And so they said, right, so we've got to put all the weight and reinforcement on the wings. And this guy went, hang on a minute. These are the ones that got back. Right? These are the ones that got back. So the first place you want to reinforce is all the places that you're not seeing any bullets. You've got to reinforce the hull. You've got to reinforce the tail. And this is absolutely obvious. But until we really start looking at deaths, I think that, there's a lot of learning that we could potentially miss. So I think you can't, if you care about your patients, does it affect me? Yeah. I mean, my wife knows if it's been a bad day, and you need a bit of time, you need to be able to reflect. And I've got 1 or 2 key people in my life, other people who understand this space, who I'll call. And, and sometimes you need a little hug or a chat, and you need to work through it with someone who understands it. And if you don't, that's not good for your own mental health. And it will affect your ability to get on your horse and do the next case. And you need to get on your horse and do the next case, Yeah,
thanks, Elliot. Again, these are, as you say, tough situations, tough conversations, but very, very important for growing and for the future patients as well. But now switching to teaching, you've taught many people, just together we're meeting just a few weeks last week, and you taught many people both in proctoring, both on live meetings, both doing live cases. Have you figured out who are going to be the students who are going to be outstanding?
Yeah, that is a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. I think we all get a sense of who's going to fly, but you get enough surprises that I never, or I very rarely pull out with anyone. There are examples of people that I really didn't think would necessarily get it. I didn't necessarily think that they would get it, and they've flown with it and become absolutely superb. Maybe one of them was me. Or maybe I'm not superb yet. I don't know. But either way, I'm constantly surprised. And I think that's because it's about skill sets. I think I've always say the sort of 90% rule, which is 90% of us have got hands that you can, have got hand-eye coordination and knowledge. Most of our success will be with our decision-making, not with our hands. You can teach most people to do it. 10% have just got unbelievable hand skills. Your Bills, your Craigs, your Tonys, your Walshies, and they just do things that just transform the space. And you look at it and you think, Canvas, great operators that I've worked with where they just sort of feel like they're in a little bit of a league of their own. But that's maybe 10%. 5%. 10% shouldn't be doing it. Okay. All right. And hopefully they've never even got to CTO. But the rest of us can do most stuff. But you do get a sense of who's going to fly with it. And the people that fly with it, it's not necessarily what they do in the lab. It's the questions that they ask. It's the commitment to the space. It's that commitment, that drive, that persistence, constantly asking about cases. It's those people that really, really want to go deep on the journey of intraprocedural decision-making, angiographic analysis. It's all the people that really do the prep work well and then really evaluate what's happened afterwards that do the best. And it's rarely that I think they're sort of completely cack-handed,
Perfect. So I guess we should not make any predictions because, as you said, you never know who will do what. But you're doing a high volume of cases. You are doing a lot of teaching in many venues and many places. So that's a lot of work and takes a toll on the body and the mind. And how do you keep in good shape and in good mood and being able to do this at a high level?
Yeah, well, I think that's you. You got to have a life, haven't you? And for me, you got to have that escape and that headspace. So I've got to say, I love cycling, but I'm not as committed to it as some of my colleagues in the space. So I wouldn't dare go on a long ride with your sprats and your strangers, to be honest. But I still love my biking. I don't do enough of it, and when I'm not on my bike enough, I'm not as slick mentally, So I think that you've really got to look after your physical health, and then it's family and the things that you love the most. Now, it's shameful and pathetic, but what happens on a football field, on a soccer field, you guys would say, on most weekends in Manchester seems to be one of the most important things in my life. And, when I go to one of those games, when I go and watch Manchester United play, that's my complete release. When I watch my boys play, and it used to be when I was playing myself, but, nowadays knees can't take it. So, that, and then, spending time with family, just being with wife, kids, and trying to, get away from it all, because, the bigger picture is that's what it's all about. CTO is pretty important in our lives, but, the most important thing is our lives.
And following on this, what is the things you're most proud of so far?
Yeah, that is. I'm not sure I've got too much to be proud of in my professional life. I think I've done okay. The things I'm most proud of are family, and family. It's having a wife that's stuck with me this long without disappearing. That's been quite valuable. I've got 4 kids, and I'm immensely proud of all of them. Those are my best achievements. In terms of professionally, I suppose I'm proud of the fact that for some reason, maybe wrongly, maybe rightly, people still seem to want to hear from me within this space. And I'm proud of the fact that I'm still learning. I'm pleased that I've not, I think the biggest risk for all of us and our generation is to embrace the word expert too much. And because, there's always so much to learn. And, we've always been people who've been trying to train. And what we want to do is avoid becoming the next generation of people who are profoundly dogmatic, You have to have a flexibility of mindset to be able to integrate new stuff, but you've still got to have a sufficient dogma to get yourself over the line. And that's a very difficult balancing act. And I'd like to think that I've mainly hit that pretty well. And I hope that continues. And the question is, what will I do in the next few years when, it's time to let the next generation step on? Will I move back gracefully, and will the next people? I think the biggest thing, I'm not proud of it yet, but what I would be most proud of is legacy. If I can train the next person, and certainly at my center, to do it, to be better than me, which won't be too difficult for them, then that would be my biggest pride. I certainly can't compete with you, Manos. That is for sure.
No,
I could name any one of your 100,000 achievements, and if I took one of those for me, I'd be very happy.
No, I think that's
my chapter in your book.
Hallmark of a great man is the humility, and I think that's exemplified very well. Actually, I wish I could put things as thoroughly and succinctly as you said, and it's not an exaggeration that at every meeting, you make the comments. Many people talk, but you are very able to make it very specific, very precise, and very digestible for many people. And that's huge. Many people talk a lot, and the people who listen to them don't really retain much. But I think the way you make it to the point and very connected with the pre-existing knowledge, I think that goes a long way. So I think lots of things for all of us to learn. But do you have any favorite books or favorite movies?
Oh, God, yeah. Well, favorite books, I mean, you can imagine, for someone who's so interested in learning from failure and, what makes someone great and what makes someone tick. So I love the books by Matthew Syed. Matthew Syed's a journalist in the UK, used to be a professional table tennis player, ping pong player in the Olympic team. And he's written a few books. He wrote a book called Bounce, which is trying to explode the talent myth, which I love. And he would argue, or he could argue in this book, there's no such thing as talent at all. It's all about commitment and practice. And if you read that alongside Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, who looks at, the circumstance and opportunity that you need to be successful, it makes you step back and makes you stay really real. And then the other book that Matthew Syed wrote, was Black Box Thinking. And if I had one thing that I would recommend someone getting into this space to read Black Box Thinking. And it's talking about how you learn from failure and how some people will never learn from theirs because they're of that closed, fixed mindset. And if you can learn to be in an open mindset, that's great. So I love those books. But I love stuff on history, and there's a book by Yuval Harari called A Brief History of Humankind. And it's a really amazing, beautiful journey through the history of the universe, really, but mainly human history. And it sets it, if you just read the first paragraph, the first two paragraphs of that, you'd be blown away. It just sets our whole existence in context and keeps us real. So I love that. But film, I love film. And there are moments where there are certain films where if they're on television, this is my biggest risk. Is that if it's on the TV and I'm tired and I've done a long day, I can't turn those films off. I have to watch them. I can't turn them off. They would be any of the Godfather Part 1 or Part 2 are just the most unbelievable, wonderful films that I've seen. So The Godfather, I love all of the Star Wars stuff. and so many more besides. You could, I would do a whole film podcast. Absolutely adore cinema, and will, gladly watch anything, particularly with De Niro in it. So yeah.
Well, again, excellent suggestions. I think for everyone, it's good to get those books. Actually, the Black Box thing, I think that's recommended reading for the complications course coming up soon. So it is, you're absolutely right. It's a phenomenal book. And although we all say we want to be open-minded, I guess in reality, you're right that sometimes it may not be quite as much as we think. And it's easy to fool yourself sometimes than otherwise.
Yeah, you can definitely say it. I've been saying it for a long time. Can you really live it? It's a lot easier. Yeah, you'll hear a lot of people on podiums, and I'm one of them, saying, "Oh yeah, you've got to be an open mindset." And then I'll be in the cath lab today, and trying to do something difficult, and my fellow goes, "You could try this," and you go, "No, don't. No, I'm not interested." Shut them down.
Be careful, right? Do as you preach, but. Again, the beauty of this is you can never be perfect, so there's always room for improvement. But in terms of the future, what are the things that excite you the most? What do you want to do in the next few years?
I think the things that are most exciting, the things that are most terrifying. I think that there's got to be a huge amount to be gained out of AI, and I think. How we can apply AI to our decision making from the clinic room into the operating room, and indeed into how we should be doing cases. I think it's equally scary and exciting, but if we don't engage in it now and start to understand it, we'll get left behind. So I think that's probably what's most exciting. I think we've gone in a phase of going, certainly with CTO, we went in a truly transformative paradigm shift when we started talking about subintimal, retrograde, ADR. They were paradigm shifts. And then since then, we've been in a period of honing and iteration, and the algorithm became the greatest innovation. And I think I'm looking forward to the next big step change and the next big what if moment. And some of them are obvious in a way, which is, I like the fact that we're moving away from stents, and I'm excited about reimagining that, era of absorbables. The first absorbable iteration didn't work, but there'll be more. They'll look back on what we did and say what we put metal into arteries is crazy. And the other thing is operating under fluoroscopy. Surely we can do this minimally invasively, but, build up better 3D maps and be able to do this a little bit more like our EP colleagues are, whether it's whatever the next step changes, someone's going to have to say, what, the biggest thing here is not just shed the lead with Rampart and things like that, but what about shed the fluoroscopy? What if we were able to operate minimally invasively? What if we went back in time 50 or 60 years and the transformative thing for imaging was not X-ray? What if it was something else? And what if we've missed a whole era of development in that direction? So I think that's, one is, what do I see in the near future? I think it's the AI story. What do I see in the long-term future? I cannot believe that in 100 years, people will be doing what we do to fix arteries. And it won't because we've come up with a tablet. I think they'll be doing it fundamentally differently. I hope so.
Well, it looks like you're already working on creating that future. And again, it may take a few more years, but I think you're absolutely right. Why take the lead when you can take the X-ray? So please let me know when that happens, because I'm going to be the first one to participate in this. But I think we're a little.
Sounds like I've got some IP in this. I don't. It's all blue sky, and I can tell you, I was always an adopter. I wasn't the guy with the ideas. I just managed to grab onto people like your coattails and allow you all to take me on the journey. Do you see what I mean? I was never the innovator. I've always been the adopter. But it would be that would be the aspiration. To really innovate.
Have some pretty bold and creative ideas out there. So you never know. I would never say never again. But if you had to give like your few tips and tricks. If you're talking to the people who are starting now, the fellows, the early career interventionalists who aspire to become like yourself and become a solid, experienced, and very successful with low complication, great teachers, what are the few things that they should most look for and adopt to reach that spot?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, there's a few of them that we've already said, which is, I think, firstly, always know yourself and ask for feedback. So you need to know where you are. I did early on in our careers, probably thought I was better than I was at different times. Maybe I still do sometimes, but, you always have to seek that feedback and know yourself and know where you are on your journey if you want to be able to progress. And that means know yourself, be able to ask for help, feel comfortable saying, I don't know, feel really own it when you don't know something. Don't cover up. Don't try and fluff it because you think that you should know something. Better to just admit that you don't know, admit when you failed and move on. So know yourself, fail fast, learn to fail, learn to understand failure and learn to evaluate it, learn to deal with failure. Be humble as much as possible. I'm not sure how I'm doing with that, but anyway,
great.
Definitely be humble, be honest, and self-preserve. Make time for yourself. At the end of your journey, you will never turn around and go, I wish I'd spent more time in the cath lab. At the end of our lives, we won't wish that we'd spent more time operating. We'll wish that we'd spent more time with family, with friends, and that's what the journey has to be there for. So, there you go.
That's a great way to end it. You're right. This is an important thing, but that's not everything. And in many ways, you're right. It's not the major thing or shouldn't be the major thing in our lives. And actually, I think the more balanced you are, probably the better job you're going to do in the cath lab and in the procedural. So, Elliot, again, this was amazing. Thank you so much for providing this unique insights. It's interesting that, as I mentioned, Daniel, before, you were able to pinpoint very accurately and give very practical recommendations. So can't wait to keep on learning from you at the next meeting.
Yeah, I would put that right back at you, Manos. You have literally written the book on almost everything that we do. Your analysis of huge amounts of data informs what I do every single day. And to be honest, I can't believe that you can put aside 40 odd minutes of your time listening to me, because I would happily give up 40 minutes or an hour of my time just to listen to you. And I often travel around the world watching you speak as well. So thanks for all that you're doing for the space. Even this podcast is really transformative. What a lovely, accessible way to try and move people forward and share ideas. So I think it's absolutely brilliant. And I'm quite humble and pleased to have even been invited. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Elliot. Thank you for listening to the Sensei podcast.